killed people. And it cost billions of dollars. And now they think they're going to get away scot-free. No, not here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Tim Lake in Albany. The state is now taking legal action against the opioid industry for their role in the deadly opioid crisis. Prosecutors have now subpoenaed dozens of people and companies they say have fed the tragedy. Now, the Department of Financial Services says New Yorkers have overpaid an estimated $2 billion in insurance premiums over the past 10 years in opioid-related costs. And they say the industry intentionally perpetuated the crisis. Governor Cuomo calling this a, quote, diabolical scheme and an industry-wide conspiracy that claimed the lives of 3,000 New Yorkers last year alone.
Give them one pill. They'll come back for more. How do you know? Because it's highly addictive, which they knew.
Well, now DFS Commissioner Linda Lacewell says she's going to use her legal authority to seek fines and restitution from 45 opioid manufacturers, also distributors and pharmacy benefit managers. She's also requesting information from 17 insurers. They're also going to hold hearings across the state saying they'll expose the problem to consumers and generate transparency. And joining us now to discuss the state's legal action is Kyle Plaskey. He's the Director of Public Policy of ASAP, the New York Association of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Providers, and of course our weekly contributor, WGY Radio news anchor Diane Donato. Kyle, thank you very much for joining us here at Empire State Weekly.
Good to be here.
Certainly. Well, first of all, we're seeing news recently of these huge settlements that various states, including New York, are trying to work out with these big opioid manufacturers. And the talk is in the billions upon billions of dollars. If settlements are reached, if this money comes in, what would New York use this enormous amount of money to do to help people who've been addicted or people's families, people who have died from opioid overdoses?
Sure. Well, I think it's important, first of all, for your viewers to understand the context that we're operating in. I think everybody knows about the breadth of the opioid and heroin crisis that's been going on for almost a decade now. And during that time, OASAS, which is the state agency tasked with overseeing addiction services, its funding has barely kept pace with the rate of inflation. Programs that treat people suffering from addiction across New York State have had to close due to the rising cost of business. Programs are reporting almost universally problems recruiting and retaining staff due to low starting salaries and the very demanding work environment of working in a treatment program. So really, there are two things that this money could substantially work toward. The first is to address the basic fundamental infrastructure of the state's service delivery system. That means keeping lights on in programs. That means allowing for programs to operate at peak capacity. What we're seeing now is a sort of crisis within a crisis, which is to say that in the middle of the opioid and heroin crisis, we have a workforce crisis. There are shortages in staff due to the lack of hiring incentives, due to the lack of relatively low starting salaries for people working in these programs. The Center for Human Services Research, located at the University at Albany, last year put out a study saying that starting salaries in addiction treatment programs in New York State are $5,000 to $7,000 lower than comparable salaries in other areas of the health and human service.
So the money is sorely needed then in these addiction treatment programs throughout the state?
So it's addressing the base infrastructure, the basic vehicle for delivering services, and it's also addressing the workforce crisis as well.
So a lot of money is needed. Another place where some money may come back would be from something that we heard about this week from Governor Cuomo, where he talked about the higher premiums we as New Yorkers have paid because of this situation that was going on that was really aided and abetted by the drug manufacturing companies and really many different players, including the distributors and the health managers as well. So if some money came back from that, which is what he says is going to happen, where do you think that money should go? Should it go back to the consumers who paid higher premiums because of this crisis, or would you want to see it go to specific programs?
It is our position that any money collected, whether it be through this initiative or whether it be through any kind of settlement with a company, be dedicated 100% to the service delivery system that has been significantly strained due to the actions of these opioid manufacturers.
I know you're not a doctor, but I want to ask you the simple question. Some people have suggested we get rid of opioids, that they're not necessary. I've seen some studies that say that, you know, we could use other medicines to take care of our pain relief. Has there been any discussion of that among groups like yours to just say, maybe as part of these settlements, we should not be selling these highly addictive drugs?
We don't typically weigh in on the medical necessity of certain products, but what we do know is that to get back to the issue of settlements with the pharmaceutical companies, we do know from court documents and investigations that these companies intentionally misled doctors into overprescribing these drugs, and to telling them that these drugs were not as addictive or as harmful as they knew that they were.
They were overprescribed, and then I believe I've seen a statistic that 3/4 of the people who have become addicted to opioids were first introduced to them through a legitimate prescription. Right. So this is a crisis unlike other opioid crises that we've had through history.
Yeah. And it has led to the illicit heroin crisis, and then to the fentanyl issue that we're now seeing today.
I know going forward, you've pushed for the Medicaid-assisted treatment, which passed the legislature this last year. The governor hasn't signed it yet. Was that something that you're starting to push on him, saying when is that signature coming?
Sure. Yeah, we are urging the governor to sign the bill that would expand access under the Medicaid program to all formularies of a medication-assisted treatment. If one particular brand of medication works for a patient, they should not be required, because they're enrolled in Medicaid, and Medicaid does not cover that particular brand, to move to something else that doesn't work for them. We think that if something works for you in your own personal understanding of it, then that is what you should be able to take.
Real quickly here, a new legislative session will be coming up here, the first of the year. What else are you anticipating and hoping that you'll see come out of Albany and the legislature that will benefit people who've been addicted in this opioid crisis?
We're hoping to see, as I said, an expansion of medication-assisted treatment. We're hoping to see the legislature and the governor expand a scholarship program that would help people who are working in the state's addiction service system. We would love to see hiring incentives for people to work into the field, to close some of these gaps, and ensure that treatment programs across the state are adequately staffed and adequately funded.
And then finally here, Kyle, we're going to see these hearings around the state, at various places around the state. Just give us a brief example of what do you think they're going to hear? What are New Yorkers going to come to these hearings and tell our policymakers?
They're going to tell our policymakers that loved ones have struggled and died. They're going to hear that the state is not doing enough to adequately address the crisis, and that the legislature this year needs to act. The governor and the legislature need to act to substantially increase funding and to work toward combating this crisis.
Well, it looks like that's about to happen. If we're talking billions of dollars in possible settlements nationwide, certainly New York and some of the other northeastern states are in the need to get that money to help fund the addiction crisis and treatment.
We hope so.
Kyle Plaskey is from the New York Association of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Providers. We appreciate you being on. I'm going to project that we'll have you on again, because I know this issue is not going away, and it will come up with a new legislative session in the start of the new year.
Of course.
Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
The state is now advising people not to use vaping devices, while the health department investigates 41 people who have now gotten sick from using them. And Governor Cuomo has some not so gentle advice for people who might ignore their warning.
Common sense says if you don't know what you are smoking, don't smoke it.
And there's more. The governor has also signed an executive order directing state agencies to begin education awareness programs on vaping, and he has signed legislation directing these agencies overseeing anti-tobacco programs to use the same methods to target e-cigarette use in kids. He's also directed the Department of Health to issue emergency regulations mandating that warning signs must be posted in all vape shops that read, "Vaping can expose you to toxic chemicals and kill you," and to issue subpoenas to 3 companies that market and use a, quote, thickening agent additive containing vitamin E acetate that's used in black market vaping products.
We don't know exactly what they are smoking or what the consequences are.
When you don't have all the information yet, and this is an ongoing investigation, there's more information, you have to err on the side of caution.
Now, the governor also wants to ban flavored e-cigarettes in New York State, and he says he'll advance legislation next year to ban all flavored e-liquids for vaping. Well, many rural upstate communities struggle to get consistent cell phone and broadband internet service still. But coming up, how two statewide efforts are now working to make sure people living in even the most remote corners of the state can get reliable service. Welcome back, everyone, to Empire State Weekly. I'm Tim Lake in Albany. Well, the state has now formed a new upstate cellular coverage task force to look into the issue of large coverage gaps in cell phone service in upstate New York. Now, the task force held its first meeting on Tuesday. It's made up of 16 people, industry experts, environmental representatives, community leaders, and government officials. They have been tasked with developing potential solutions and policies to address the lack of cell phone service in rural and remote parts of the states. Now, state lawmakers are also holding a public hearing this Tuesday on improving rural broadband internet access in New York. Syracuse area Senator Rachel May and Albany area Assemblyman Angelo Santa Barbara are leading the hearing at the Capitol. They're going to be looking at how to better understand the challenges of rural broadband access and to identify areas of need to help serve upstate New York. Joining us now to discuss these efforts is a person who's playing a central role in both of them. Assemblyman Angelo Santa Barbara represents people here in the Capital Region. Thank you very much for being with us here today.
Great to be on the show. Congratulations on the new set. Looks great.
Thank you. So in 2015, the governor launched the Broadband Initiative New York. I was thinking it was $500 million, and the goal was to get broadband to 99% of New York State. How well are we doing? How far are we from that goal now?
Well, I think what we're finding is, this is, the topic of the discussion that we're going to be talking about is that, the rural areas, some of the remote areas, and a lot of the communities I represent, we found that we're sort of, not being addressed. Some of the areas that are more populated, got the coverage, we keep, through the first, second, third round. But we're seeing that, I still get constituents that call, and most of them are in these rural communities. And this is something that needs to be addressed. This is something we'll be talking about at the upcoming hearing, because, why are these communities being missed? And part of it, could be a cost factor. There could be a, terrain factor, obstacles in the way. But whatever those challenges are, we need to know about them, and we need to know how to overcome them so that we can get service to these areas. Because the goal is to get them to everybody in the state, whether you live in a rural community, and it's mostly an upstate issue. And when I hear from constituents, they feel like they're being left out, and that's just not right. Just because you live in a rural community shouldn't mean that you're cut off from communication and from what's considered basic services at this point.
This is becoming economic do or die.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But is it possible, is it reasonable to expect these companies to invest thousands of dollars just to run a wire down a mile of road to reach, say, a farm or something when there's no payback, even over a long period of time?
Well, that is what's the topic of discussion right now. Mm-hmm. The answer is yes, because these companies have entered into an agreement. They entered into this agreement that they would provide service to these areas. Now, why are these areas being missed? That's the question I'm asking. That's why, I'm going back to the companies now and saying, the Public Service Commission, why are these areas being missed? We agreed, state funds were invested. So we put some funds into this. The company agreed they would provide service in these areas, but some homes are being missed. And it seems to be a pattern, something that needs to be addressed, something that the company made a commitment to do. Now, again, there's state funds invested. They're not on their own, so we put funds into this. We expect results. And my constituents expect results.
So that's where you come in and hold their feet to the fire.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Before we started taping, you were mentioning a lot of places have some service, but it's not reliable.
Yeah.
It's not quality service. You were also mentioning, Tim, earlier the idea that sometimes you'll look at a cell phone map and it'll say that there's coverage there, but in reality, it's very difficult to get coverage there. So is there a little bit of a game going on here with people saying, oh yes, we are providing service, but it's not service that anybody can expect to
And
really
I think that brings us to our next section of this, the Upstate Cellular Task Force, Coverage Task Force that just met not too long ago. We had our first meeting. We're looking to produce a report well before the next session, because part of what we're doing, what we're tasked with, the task force is made up of government, community leaders, industry experts, providers, elected officials. I'm on that task force. I have a background in civil engineering, but I also represent a lot of the communities we're talking about. And again, this is mostly an upstate issue. I want to repeat this. This is really an upstate issue that we're talking about. But part of that assessment, part of the work we're doing is what's the first part that's going on right now as we speak is a drive test. So they're actually driving the roads, creating a map, pulling out pulling out a phone, seeing what the coverage actually is. What they say it is and what it actually is, we're finding is a big difference.
So it's misleading and deceptive, maybe. If you look at a map when you're buying your service and they say, we have you covered in the Adirondacks, so buy my service, and then you get to the Adirondacks and you realize, I don't have cell service.
And the assessment so far is showing exactly what you said, Tim. It's exactly what it's showing. They're saying there's coverage. In some areas, some of the roads are saying, okay, there's coverage here. In fact, we've gone out there and there was no coverage at all. There wasn't even any service. So that's a big problem. So part of the first, some of the first steps we're doing here with this task force is to assess the coverage, come together because part of it is the new technology that we've seen, the smart city street lighting. So we don't necessarily need a big towers anymore. So that helps out with the new technology to be able to put smaller nodes in areas to increase that coverage, to boost it.
Can you, as the member of the Assembly and the senators, can you force these companies to make sure they've blanketed the entire upstate New York, or is that not
Well,
possible?
with broadband, again, we've invested the funds. I expect results. So yes, we're going to be looking for accountability.
What about
on
these
this.
settlements? The most recent one was with Spectrum. Is that something that's in the works over the next few
Well,
years to cover everywhere?
the settlements are fine, but at the end of the day, what we need is them to deliver on what they promised. So I have people in Duanesburg, I have people in Fultonville, I have people out in Canajoharie, I have people across my district that just don't have coverage. And I hate to say that, but when you think about the school kids, you think about how it affects them when their classmates have coverage or are able to get online and do homework and do things that they're expected to do. And when kids are not able to do that, some of them it's just so frustrating for the parents, but the kids are just, you feel like you're just being left behind and you don't have the tools to even keep up with the rest of the class. So,
And the costs are mounting if we get left behind. How is New York State doing compared to other states in our region?
that's the other part of this, is it puts us at an economic disadvantage. It puts us behind other states. The good news is we have a task force. We're making plans. It's a pretty aggressive schedule. As I said, by November 1st, we're going to have recommendations on legislation, on potential partnerships. We also have agencies, because permitting is a big part of this, because the permitting seems to take forever on this. We want to have an expedited process.
Got to stop you there. We're out of time. We appreciate it again
Thank
being
you.
on, and hopefully this problem, cell phones and broadband,
gonna get
can be
better.
resolved someday. All right, just a month after going into effect, the Child Victims Act leads to a major financial decision now by a Catholic diocese in upstate New York. What it means for the church and the alleged victims who simply want justice. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Tim Lake in Albany. The Catholic Diocese of Rochester files for bankruptcy, a direct result of lawsuits against the church stemming from the one-month-old Child Victims Act here in New York. Now, the diocese becomes the first of the state's 8 to seek protection from creditors and bankruptcy court over the church's decades-long sexual abuse scandal. The filing also gives the diocese time to create a plan to continue operating its 86 parishes in 12 counties. It is, by the way, the 20th Catholic diocese to make this move, but it is the first here in New York State. Well, another of New York's newest gun laws went into effect this past week. The law extends the background check waiting period from 3 days to 30 days in cases where a federal background check returns an inconclusive response. It extends the state's waiting period, and it will give federal authorities more time for those checks. There is a new twist now in the trial of an indicted New York politician. Coming up, what a ruling could mean for the future of Congressman Chris Collins, and you might be surprised to hear what he says about his chance of winning if he runs for re-election again. And finally, here on Empire State Weekly, upstate New York Congressman Chris Collins pleading not guilty again to a superseding indictment against him for alleged insider trading. Now, even after his initial indictment, Collins was reelected in his rural Buffalo-Rochester area district. This new indictment removes some of the allegations in an effort to keep the February trial on schedule and to hinder Collins' plan to use his congressional privileges as part of his defense. Now, prosecutors have considered trying Collins separately from his son and his son's father-in-law, who face similar charges. Collins said he's undecided about running again, but he also said that if he does run, that he would be reelected. For now, for all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I'm Tim Lake in Albany. We'll see you right back here next week. And don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here now is the full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations across New York State.